Well, let's speak now to Ira Winkler, an encryption security expert in Maryland in the United States. When you read that open letter, it seems to make sense. I mean, he actually says that we don't even need to set a precedent here in terms of a sort of a backdoor master key approach to this. Who's right, do you think?
He is making a lot more out of what the government is asking for than what it actually is asking for. What really the government is asking for is a slight modification to the newer version of the Apple operating system and basically taking out a function that was added in the new version. But what they need is Apple to install it onto the phone. The bigger issue that they're kind of losing and making the real issue, though, is the precedent this potentially sets, because if the government can come to them in this case, which is obviously a heinous case of terrorism, what other cases can they go to them for? As a policy issue, that's the more valid question. But all these things that the government's trying to violate encryption and tools are going to be out there is frankly just a lot of bluster.
Well, yeah, I suppose the other problem is that Apple has made itself the privacy company, and with previous models, you know, the FBI authorities have been able to get into it. I suppose when one thinks about child abuse, sex abusers and things like that, that could warrant exactly the same argument. Just on a practical level, though, this is really about something to stop the phone self-destructing or being wiped, isn't it? Would that be easy for Apple to do? Say, okay, look, we'll give you unlimited chances. I mean, it could take you another 10 years to get in, but would that be a pragmatic way through?
Well, that's exactly what the government is asking for. The government warrant, if you actually read the government warrant, it says, we want you to modify the operating system to allow for unlimited tries and install it, because Apple has to install it itself because it has to have the digital certificate. Otherwise, the phone will not accept the update. It's actually a very simple request that the government is asking for, but they're making it sound like, you know, the government wants to break encryption at will, which is not what they're doing. They want to bypass the destruct mechanism on this one phone. But, you know, there is the precedent of doing it in the future, but that's a different question.
How is this playing into the backdrop, the context of the Snowden revelations and things as well? I mean, is it, do you think, a growing trend now that Americans, you know, don't trust technology or companies or the government when, after all the reports of how much influence the government has in the technology that we all own?
Well, the Snowden effect is way overblown. I mean, what happens is there's a pendulum. Everybody hears about an outrage, but then there's a terrorist attack, and everybody's like, you know what? We do need some reasonable protections. And after San Bernardino, there is a just cause for reasonable protections. And there's always a balance. The question is, how much is this actually weakening security? And this is not weakening security. And is this a case where there's always going to be a verbal subsegment of the population where it says, my God, the government is overreaching. The reality is that is a vocal group of people. And I think the silent majority, frankly, just doesn't care, doesn't know what's going on, and would be happy either way. The people, however, with the platform are Cook, Apple, and the privacy forums, while the government is not very good at publicity on its own. No, so there's a balance that's not getting out there.
Yeah, and just briefly, I was just reading, there's a very old act, actually, which will allow the FBI to compel Apple to do this. The All Writs Act, which dates back to 1789.
Yeah. Now, that All Writs Act, because a lot of people say there's no reason for laws for governing technology and security because we already have enough laws on the books that might do that. Now, we actually show there's a law that might govern this, and they're complaining that it's out of date. So there's that argument that people who are against the government reach in this case, saying we don't want the Apple to be forced to comply because of an old act, again, are the same people who say we don't need new laws because new laws will not account for things and there's enough laws on the books. So again, there's a dichotomy of what people claim, what people want, and frankly, the court should look at it as they should without the bluster of the government trying to bypass encryption, because it's more a policy on how much Apple should be compelled to help.
All right, Ira Winkler, fascinating. Thank you very much indeed for talking to us.